Hey there! This lovely manhwa is titled, I Am Trying to Divorce My Husband, But We Have a Child. If you love stories like this, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you'll never miss the next episode. Getting reincarnated sounds cool until you realize you're the side character everyone wants dead. Seo Yuna was just your average 20-something woman living her best life reading fantasy romance novels when the universe decided to play the ultimate prank on her. After dying in a car accident, because apparently crossing the street is more dangerous than dragon slaying, she wakes up in someone else's body. Not just any body, mind you, but that of Elissa Rubelin, the doomed villainess from The Birdcage, the very last novel she had been reading. And, naturally, it had to be an R-rated angst fantasy romance novel, because regular reincarnation is apparently too mainstream. Elissa's life reads like a country song written by someone having a particularly bad day. Her parents died in a carriage accident, leaving her broke and alone because dear old dad managed to bankrupt the family business before his departure. She's basically an orphaned, penniless noble with the worst luck in literary history. Enter Duke Albert Rubelin, a man who smokes cigarettes like they're going out of style and has all the warmth of a medieval tax collector. Having lost his own son and daughter-in-law in yet another tragic carriage accident, seriously, what is it with carriages in this world? The Duke decides that what his family really needs is a strategic marriage alliance. The Duke's proposal is about as romantic as a business merger. He essentially tells Elissa, "You're a nobody, but I'm graciously allowing you to marry my grandson, Richard." It's like being offered a participation trophy, except the prize is a potentially murderous husband. Then comes the Duke's enlightening lecture on gender roles. According to his grace, being a woman is easy. You just need to pop out some babies and enjoy living off your husband's hard work. Elissa, who literally just started her period, is internally calling him an old geezer while maintaining the kind of fake smile usually reserved for customer service jobs. A random man at the table decides to contribute his own hot take, explaining that, actually, being a man is the easy part. Men can ignore their families all day for business, then waltz home and take credit for everything their wives accomplished. It's like a Victorian-era mansplaining convention in there. Speaking of Richard, the groom-to-be is fashionably late because he's apparently playing hero in the mountains, fighting thieves to improve territorial safety. The Duke thinks this is pointless, and honestly, Richard seems about as excited about this arranged marriage as someone getting audited by the IRS. Throughout all this, Elissa keeps having vivid memories of the original story, standing with Richard under starry skies, watching him embrace another man, plot twist, and seeing glimpses of her character's doomed future. She remembers that in the original novel, Elissa becomes obsessively in love with Richard and eventually gets murdered by him. It's like having spoilers for your own life, except the ending involves your death. The story culminates with the Duke sliding a marriage certificate across his desk, complete with illegible fancy handwriting and someone named Randa's signature already on it. Elissa realizes she's about to sign away her fate, but she's determined to rewrite the story. She's got roughly 10 years before her character's scheduled death, and she's planning to use every single day to avoid the whole getting murdered by her obsessive love for her husband situation. Essentially, this is the story of a woman who died, got reincarnated as a villainess in a romance novel, and now has to figure out how to avoid getting killed by her future husband while navigating the world's most dysfunctional arranged marriage. It's like Pride and Prejudice meets Final Destination, with a hefty dose of gender commentary thrown in for good measure. Elissa's got her work cut out for her. She needs to survive a loveless political marriage, avoid becoming the obsessive villain from the original story, and somehow not get murdered by a man who's currently off playing a vigilante in the mountains. Just another day in the life of an isekai protagonist, really. Because nothing says happily ever after like trying not to get murdered by your own husband. After signing the marriage certificate, The actual wedding ceremony happens with all the enthusiasm of a tax audit. An attendant in fancy ceremonial robes pronounces Richard and Elissa husband and wife before some goddess named Aren, complete with mystical pink glowing effects and ethereal lighting. It's very pretty, very official, and absolutely nobody involved seems happy about it. Elissa clenches her fists with fiery determination, declaring to herself that she just needs to survive 8 years in this duchy before making her great escape. She's basically treating this marriage like a really expensive, really long prison sentence with good room service. When Elissa gets shown to her new quarters as the Lord's wife, she's absolutely blown away by the luxury. We're talking ornate golden frames, pink roses everywhere, fancy dresses hanging ready for use, and furniture that probably costs more than most people's houses. She flops onto the massive bed like she's just checked in to a 5-star hotel, which isn't entirely wrong. The evening passes quietly, and Richard still hasn't shown up. Elissa is simultaneously curious and terrified about meeting him, which is probably the healthiest attitude to have towards someone who's destined to murder you in the original timeline. Just as Elissa is drifting off to sleep, the sound of creaking breaks the quiet. Enter Richard Rubilin, a young man with dark brown hair, dressed in a white ruffled shirt and red vest, who has apparently decided that breaking into his new wife's bedroom at night is an appropriate way to introduce himself. Real smooth, Richard, real smooth. Elissa wakes up terrified, reasonably so, clutching her nightgown and basically having a panic attack as this stranger approaches her in the dark. Richard's first words to his new bride? He complains that she's so small he can barely see her. Not exactly, hello, nice to meet you, but it sets the tone for their relationship perfectly. Things get even more awkward when Richard tries to leave and discovers someone has locked the bedroom door from the outside, because apparently the household staff decided these two needed some bonding time, whether they wanted it or not. Richard proceeds to have an absolute meltdown, complete with blazing red eyes and clenched fists, cursing whoever trapped them together. Here's where things get interesting. Richard has magical wind powers. It's a hereditary trait of House Rubilin that gives him complete control over wind, and he's apparently ready to use it to blast down the door. Elissa watches in terror as her new husband glows with light blue energy, threatening to kill whoever locked them in. Nothing says romantic wedding night quite like magical death threats. Eventually, the drama dies down, and Richard ends up falling asleep on an ornate couch, leaving Elissa to contemplate her situation. She decides she should probably introduce herself properly since he is, technically, her husband now. Elissa nervously approaches the sleeping Richard and gives what might be the most awkward introduction in literary history. She tells him she's Elissa Lohengrin, now Elissa Rubilin, and that it's a pleasure to meet him. Richard's response? Complete silence. The man doesn't even acknowledge her existence. Elissa's internal commentary is priceless. She decides that whatever kind of person Richard is, he's definitely incredibly rude, which, let's be honest, is a pretty fair assessment of someone who breaks into your room, complains about your size, threatens to murder people, and then ignores your attempts at polite conversation. The next day, Richard marches straight to his grandfather and demands to cancel the marriage. The Duke, smoking his cigarette like a chimney, reminds Richard that he made this promise before a goddess and can't just break it. Richard's brilliant counter-argument: he claims he never actually took any wedding vows, which is technically true, but also completely missing the point. Duke Rubilin is having none of Richard's rebellion. He asks if Richard doesn't like how Elissa looks, acknowledging she's young but insisting she's pretty. Then he delivers the most medieval guilt trip imaginable, asking if Richard is going to be like his father, someone who couldn't marry without love. The Duke's solution is basically a breeding contract with a time limit. Stay with Elissa until you come of age, preferably have some children, and then you can marry whoever you actually want. It's romantic in the way that livestock management is romantic. He reminds Richard that all his privileges come from being the family successor, and if he's not going to fulfill his duties, i.e. produce heirs, then he doesn't deserve the title. It's emotional blackmail with a side of family legacy pressure. So far, this marriage is off to about as good a start as the Titanic's maiden voyage. Richard wants out before it even begins. Elissa is planning her eventual divorce settlement, and the Duke is basically treating his grandson like a prize stallion who needs to do his duty to the bloodline. Richard stands there with his head bowed, probably contemplating whether magical wind powers are sufficient to blow away family obligations. Spoiler alert, they're not. The stage is set for what promises to be the most dysfunctional marriage in fantasy literature, with a gold-digging reincarnated villainess and a reluctant groom who has anger management issues and magical powers. What could possibly go wrong? Absolutely everything, as it turns out. Richard's response to his grandfather's breeding program ultimatum is peak teenage angst. He asks when he ever wanted this title anyway, classic "I didn't ask to be born" energy, and firmly declares he has zero interest in that little girl and doesn't want her in his room again. The Duke's response? Richard has to stay for breakfast too, because nothing says happy marriage like forced family meals. The first of many awkward encounters when Elissa tries to follow proper newlywed protocol by greeting the elders and having breakfast together. Unfortunately, Richard was already gone when she woke up, leading to her getting lectured by the Duke about proper wifely behavior on day one of marriage. When someone suggests that sharing a room will help the newlyweds grow close, Richard explodes again, shouting that he already said he wouldn't share a room with her. The man has commitment issues that could fill their own psychology textbook. The Duke's solution to Elissa's apparent lack of wifely skills, he hands her a book titled Qualities of a Good Wife and assigns her a teacher to help her study it. Elissa's immediate reaction that it's probably a useless book full of boring material is spot on. She's basically been enrolled in Victorian wife boot camp against her will. Elissa's days become filled with the kind of finishing school activities that would make any modern woman want to stage a revolt. Balancing books on her head, embroidery, manners lessons, and duchess etiquette. It's like Princess Diaries, but with more existential dread and fewer makeover montages. The one silver lining? Once classes end, she has free time to explore the massive library. House Rubelin's library becomes her refuge, where she can actually learn useful things about this world instead of how to curtsy properly. After witnessing more confrontations between Richard and his grandfather, where the Duke literally treats Richard like a breeding horse, Elissa has a strategic epiphany. She realizes that Richard is just as trapped in the situation as she is, making him a potential ally rather than an enemy. Her attempts at friendship, however, go about as well as you'd expect. When she tries to put a blanket over him while he's sleeping at a desk, Richard immediately assumes it's some kind of seduction attempt orchestrated by his grandfather. The boy has trust issues deeper than the Mariana Trench. Richard's paranoia reaches new heights when he accuses Elissa of trying to seduce him on the Duke's orders. Elissa's confusion is genuine. She literally has no idea what he's talking about regarding seduction. Her innocent attempt at basic human kindness gets interpreted as some kind of master manipulation scheme. When Richard challenges every explanation she gives, claiming she could be lying on the Duke's orders, Elissa finally snaps with perfect logic. It doesn't matter how much she tries to seduce him, as long as he doesn't fall for it, right? Even Richard has to flinch at that perfectly reasonable response. Here's where the story gets into the real political intrigue. Elissa explains the historical context that's driving their forced marriage. The four founding houses of the empire, Rubilin controlling air, Kairat controlling fire, Sariat controlling water, and a fourth controlling earth, had an ancient pact. House Kairat took the throne with House Rubilin serving as a check against tyranny. But over time, the imperial family got greedy and started wanting House Rubilin's power too. Their solution? A diplomatic marriage between Richard and the princess. The Duke forced Richard into marriage with Elissa specifically to block this imperial power grab. Armed with this understanding, Elissa makes Richard an offer he can't refuse, a purely political marriage of convenience. She doesn't want children or to become a duchess. She just wants to maintain the marriage until she comes of age, then leave with whatever settlement she can get. Richard, realizing that Elissa is much smarter than he initially thought, agrees to the deal. In a moment of genuine recognition, he sees past his assumptions and realizes she's not his grandfather's pawn, but someone playing her own survival game. Their political alliance gets off to an amusing start when they agree to share a bed, just holding hands. Elissa, being a normal person who moves in her sleep, ends up cuddling Richard throughout the night. Richard wakes up to find his business partner using him as a human pillow, wondering how someone who promised they'd just hold hands ended up sprawled all over him. The poor guy also realizes Elissa is apparently a violent sleeper who is pushing him off the bed all night. Nothing says political alliance like getting accidentally assaulted in your sleep by your 12-year-old business partner. What started as a hostile arranged marriage has evolved into something more like a mutual non-aggression pact. Both Richard and Elissa are trapped by the Duke's machinations. Both won out of their situation, and both are smart enough to realize they're stronger as allies than enemies. Richard has gone from seeing Elissa as either a naive pawn or a manipulative seductress to recognizing her as a fellow prisoner with her own agenda. Elissa has successfully positioned herself as a temporary political shield rather than a permanent romantic burden. It's not love, it's not even friendship yet, but it's the beginning of mutual respect between two people who've decided to make the best of an impossible situation. And if that making the best of it involves accidental nighttime cuddling, well, that's just an occupational hazard of sharing a bed for political convenience. Who knew that arranged marriages could be such complex business negotiations? Richard, despite his gruff exterior, unconsciously cared for Elissa during the night by pulling covers over her when she complained of being cold. The next morning, he left without a word, because apparently good deeds don't require basic courtesy. While Elissa tried to enjoy a peaceful morning reading at an elegant table with orange tulips, she discovered Anne, a young maid, doing everyone else's job. The poor girl was trembling on a stool, clearly overwhelmed. It turned out the older maids had manipulated Anne into doing their work permanently by claiming she needed to make up for their previous scolding by the head maid. Classic workplace bullying with a medieval twist. Rather than confronting the bullies directly, Elissa cleverly approached the Duke, claiming she needed a better personal maid who could actually do all the required tasks. She basically told him that she'd only seen one maid doing any real work, which was technically true, but strategically brilliant. The Duke immediately ordered an investigation. The lazy maids were fired on the spot, kneeling and begging on red carpet as their deception was exposed. The Duke butler and head butler delivered the ultimate burn. Since you don't wish to work, your wish can now come true. Elissa began taking finance classes with Richard, already planning to use her future alimony for business ventures. Their instructor praised them both, though Richard got flustered when Elissa interrupted his moment of glory and accidentally touched his hand. For someone so composed, Richard sure was jumpy about basic human contact. When Richard dismissed cookies as for children, Elissa took it as a personal attack on her maturity and declared war by refusing to share any sweets with him. Richard's response of, "Do whatever you want," was the medieval equivalent of, "Okay, sure, whatever." While Elissa and Anne were out shopping for snack business ingredients, their carriage was attacked by monsters. Just as a giant scorpion creature was about to turn them into medieval Happy Meals, Richard appeared with dramatic blue energy swirls and lightning effects, destroying the monster in one blow. He noted that thunderstorms were always effective, like a medieval weather-based superhero. After the rescue, Elissa thanked Richard earnestly, while he maintained his smug, "I have no expectations of a cookie-loving child" attitude. Meanwhile, Anne wondered if Elissa was genuinely kind or just naive for looking after a younger maid, despite her own injuries and trauma. The big day turned out to be their departure for the imperial hunting festival. The emperor had invited them specifically to verify that Elissa actually existed and wasn't just a fabrication to avoid Richard marrying into the imperial family. The 15-day journey began 4 days after receiving the invitation, with Elissa exhausted from the frantic preparations. During the carriage ride, when Elissa asked about the crown prince and princess, Richard's assessment proved prophetic. Complete garbage and repulsive piles of garbage. His harsh judgment would soon be validated in spectacular fashion. Upon arrival, Elissa felt overwhelmed by the intense scrutiny from the assembled nobles. The crown princess's mother immediately delivered backhanded compliments, calling Elissa a proper lady of the islands, even if you are just pretending to be one. The maternal pride was strong with this one. Even hedgehogs think their babies are cute, as Elissa wisely observed. Crown Prince began orchestrating seating arrangements like a medieval wedding planner with control issues, clearly intending to separate Richard and Elissa. However, Richard shocked everyone by refusing to leave his wife's side, declaring it natural for spouses to sit together. This public display of unity left observers commenting that Richard had become a complete fool in love. The Crown Prince's true nature emerged during what should have been a celebratory toast. Instead of offering a proper drink to Ansel, a white-haired nobleman who had missed previous gatherings, the prince accidentally poured grape juice all over the man's head. The sadistic performance continued as he mockingly suggested Ansel should start washing his hair with grape juice since purple looks better on you. The assembled noblewomen burst into cruel laughter, suggesting Ansel should permanently dye his hair that color. Elissa sat in horrified disbelief, wondering if everyone had lost their minds as they participated in public humiliation disguised as entertainment. When a helpful person offered Elissa a cloth to help clean Ansel, the crown prince turned his attention to her, praising her kindness in helping his friend. Just as he prepared to humiliate her with another glass of red liquid, a mysterious windstorm suddenly erupted. The magical windstorm sent the dining room into complete chaos. Wine spilled everywhere, including onto someone named Christian's white uniform, who became furious and demanded to know who was responsible. As Christian struggled against restraint, threatening revenge, other nobles commented that he sounded like a minion working for a villain, and questioned why he couldn't just leave quietly. In the aftermath, Richard quickly helped Elissa escape the situation. When she thanked him, he explained matter-of-factly that she was a Rubilin now, which was why he helped her. Elissa smiled brightly, acknowledging his reasoning, but adding that he still chose to help her anyway, calling him my dear husband. Richard's awkward response and quick departure revealed his discomfort with genuine gratitude, leaving Elissa realizing he didn't actually feel like helping her, but did it out of duty. Later, as Elissa tried unsuccessfully to clean grape juice stains from her dress, her maid lamented that sitting next to the troublemaker had ruined such a pretty dress and prevented her from having tea time with the other ladies. Secretly, Elissa was relieved. The incident had given her the perfect excuse to avoid the forced socializing she dreaded. The section ended with Elissa and her maid crouching behind bushes after hearing people talking nearby. Elissa warned her maid to stay quiet and crouch down, suggesting they were about to overhear something significant. The adventure was clearly far from over. Of the imperial forest, they both witnessed a scene that would change everything. 3 mysterious cloaked figures moved through the sacred hunting grounds with sinister purpose. And what troubled Elissa most was that they bore no coat of arms, an alarming breach of protocol for anyone permitted on imperial territory. The leader, shrouded in dark green, spoke in hushed but menacing tones about their target, Lord Richard. Elissa gasped in horror as the gravity of the situation became clear. Should they alert the Imperial Knights? But what if the Emperor himself had orchestrated this plot? The political implications made any course of action dangerous. The scene shifted to reveal Richard already surrounded by armed attackers under the bright spy. When the battle began, Richard unleashed his magical powers with devastating effect. The attackers, overwhelmed by his display of power, could only cry out, "You monstrous freak!" Harsh words, but considering they were trying to kill him, perhaps understandable. The wind currents Richard controlled swirled with dangerous intensity, repelling his assailants and causing screams of pain as they cracked under his magical assault. One surviving attacker could only gasp in exhaustion and fear at the display of Richard's abilities. Elissa sprang into action, dashing through the wooded area while calling for her servant to follow. When she reached the Rubilin Knights, she burst into their presence, panting and gasping from her desperate sprint. The knights initially showed skepticism. After all, they were on the supposedly protected imperial hunting ground. But Elissa pressed her case with intensity, her teal eyes blazing with conviction. What if what I'm telling you right now is true, and something does happen to Lord Richard? The dark-haired knight understood immediately, his purple eyes fixing on his subordinates as he posed the crucial question, "Do you think Duke Rubilin will allow such a thing to go unpunished?" The knights fell silent, finally grasping the severity of the situation. Elissa reminded them of their blood oath to House Rubilin, a promise that could not be broken under any circumstances. Elissa mounted her black horse and rode swiftly into the woods, her light pink dress flowing behind her. She recognized Richard's magical signature in the violent blue wind that swept through the forest, but something felt wrong, rougher and more violent than usual. When they finally found Richard, he was bleeding heavily, his dark blue uniform with ornate gold buttons stained with blood. Elissa rushed to support him as he collapsed, crying out his name in distress. The aftermath was swift and far-reaching. The hunting festival was immediately canceled. Nothing ruins a party like attempted murder. Duke Rubilin requested investigative authority from His Majesty, and although the Emperor was initially offended by the implicit criticism of his security, he ultimately granted the authority to preserve his public image. While Richard recovered in bed with his right arm carefully bandaged, Anne the maid made a disturbing discovery. She had seen one of the attackers casually walking through their own manor's hallways like he owned the place. Following him secretly, she watched as he entered Duke Rubilin's office. What she overheard there changed everything. It was Duke Rubilin himself who had orchestrated the entire assassination attempt against his own grandson. The full scope of the deception became clear. The entire incident had been carefully staged political theater to demonstrate that House Rubilin remained strong and influential. Richard had been used as an unwitting pawn, his near-death experience serving as proof of the family's continued importance and power. The visits from nobles that followed weren't well wishes, they were political meetings to capitalize on the dramatic events. When Elissa decided to tell Richard about his grandfather's betrayal, Richard's response stunned her. "You don't have to tell me. I already know." Richard then revealed the horrifying truth about his past. As an illegitimate child, he was considered the biggest embarrassment to the prestigious Rubilin family. When his father was alive, Duke Rubilin had hired assassins to kill the young boy. Richard had survived by hiding in dark alleys and sewers while killers searched for him. After his father's death, Duke Rubilin's attitude changed dramatically, not out of love, but out of necessity. He needed Richard to carry on the bloodline and serve his political ambitions. The cruel irony wasn't lost on Richard. His bastard birth didn't matter as long as he could serve the Duke's purposes. Richard's eyes glowed red with determination as he made his declaration. "I'm going to put an end to House Rubilin." Elissa's perspective on Richard shifted completely. She had thought he was merely a moody teenager, but now she understood the depth of his suffering. Acting on pure emotion, she embraced Richard, offering him comfort and support he had never received. Sitting on an ornate sofa with his bandaged hand in hers, Elissa made a promise that would change both their lives. I will be on your side. No matter what happens, I will always be on your side. You can count on me. Richard processed this unexpected alliance and simply replied, okay. But the word carried the weight of a partnership that would reshape their future. Meanwhile, in the imperial palace, political wheels were turning. The emperor summoned his advisor Lamor for an early morning audience, discussing the threat that Rubilin of the Storm posed to the empire. What would you do with a pawn that could possibly become a queen? The emperor asked strategically. I would do anything to get rid of it, Lamor replied without hesitation. When the emperor pressed about what to do when force couldn't be used openly, Lamor smiled cunningly. You can always come up with an excuse, Your Majesty. The solution he proposed was both elegant and historically rooted: the Oath of Brothers, an ancient pact between the four houses that contributed to founding the Arencia Empire. Under this agreement, if three houses decided to rebel for just cause, the imperial family couldn't completely destroy them. Conversely, if the imperial household required assistance, the three houses were obligated to protect the imperial family. While the oath might prevent direct assassination, it could certainly be used to corner Richard and force him into an impossible situation. The story reveals a complex web of family betrayal, political manipulation, and survival. Richard, an illegitimate heir used as a pawn by his own grandfather, discovers he has an unexpected ally in Elissa just as imperial forces plot to use ancient laws against him. Duke Rubelin's scheme to use his grandson's near death as political theater backfired spectacularly. Instead of strengthening his position, he created a powerful enemy within his own family. The stage is set for a political and magical confrontation where family loyalty is optional, assassination attempts are business strategy, and the only person Richard can trust is the wife he initially didn't want. Back at the Rubelin estate, life settled into a semblance of normalcy, despite the underlying tensions. Elissa practiced mathematics with an abacus under Richard's patient guidance, slowly improving her skills, though still mixing up 367 and 377, close enough for medieval math standards. Their peaceful tutoring was interrupted when a maid announced that Count Arden and Lord Ansel had come to visit. Lord Ansel was the young man Elissa had helped during a previous incident involving purple grape juice and some social embarrassment. He wanted to thank her and return her handkerchief, though he'd had to get a new one since the grape stain wouldn't come out. Richard immediately wanted to join the visit, but Elissa insisted he stay in bed to recover. This triggered Richard's jealousy in spectacular fashion. He spent the entire visit spying on them from behind a door, grinding his teeth and fuming about why Elissa was getting dressed up for another man. During the garden tea party, Lord Ansel politely returned the replacement handkerchief and thanked Elissa for her help. Elissa, ever practical, mentioned she also likes shiny and expensive stuff because a girl's gotta think about her post-divorce financial security. Richard's jealousy eventually drove him to abandon his sickbed and join the gathering, where he proceeded to be as unwelcoming as possible. When Ansel thanked him for his help during the previous incident, Richard coldly replied, "As a husband, I was only helping my wife. I don't see why you should thank me for it." Subtle as a brick to the face, this one. Elissa, frustrated by Richard's rudeness, conveniently developed dizziness to escape the awkward situation. As they prepared to leave, Ansel invited Elissa to a party at his manor, which delighted her, but clearly troubled Richard. Back in their rooms, the domestic routine continued, with Elissa trying to get Richard to take his medicine. When he refused, she employed gentle manipulation. but I know you will take it because you're a good husband. Medieval wives, mastering psychological warfare since forever. The conversation eventually turned to Ansel's party invitation. Elissa confirmed she was going, explaining that Duke Rubilin would want her to maintain the relationship with Count Arden, who had valuable trade connections with the Eastern continent. Her internal thoughts revealed her practical approach to friendship building for her eventual independent life. Richard's possessiveness finally exploded into a full confession. He demanded Elissa's undivided attention, explaining that if she was truly on his side, she shouldn't be friendly with other men. The scene culminated with Richard leaning over Elissa in bed, touching her cheek and making his territorial claim clear. Despite his jealous behavior, Richard surprised Elissa by deciding to accompany her to Count Arden's party. Dressed in his white and gold uniform, he helped her from their carriage with unexpected gentleness, extending his hand and offering to escort her properly. Elissa reflected on how Richard was finally starting to be genuinely nice to her. Unlike the mere formality of his assistance at the imperial hunting ground, this gesture carried real care and consideration. Count Arden's party was a magnificent affair, held in an opulent hall with a large fountain. The announcement of now entering Duke Rubilin, Lord Richard, and Lady Elissa drew impressed reactions from the assembled guests. The entertainment included violinists and cellists, and Duke Rubilin gave a gracious speech thanking everyone for making the day special. However, the couple experienced the social attention differently. Richard interpreted the guests' behavior as people, quote, bowing down to them because they know how powerful Richard is. Elissa had a much more uncomfortable reading of the situation, sensing that the intention was exactly what Duke Rubilin had orchestrated, using them as political tools once again. Meanwhile, young Rose experienced her first real party with wide-eyed excitement, marveling at the grand affair before being escorted to the separate building where tea parties for young lords and ladies were held apart from the adult gathering. The story reveals Richard's growing emotional attachment to Elissa, though expressed through possessive jealousy rather than healthy affection. His demand for her undivided attention shows both his desperate need for loyalty, understandable given his traumatic past, and his struggle to understand appropriate relationship boundaries. Elissa continues to navigate the complex political and personal landscape, balancing her genuine care for Richard with her practical need to build connections for her future independence. Her observation that Richard's kindness feels different now suggests their relationship is slowly evolving from political arrangement towards something more genuine. The domestic subplot adds, quote, jealous husband discovers that sharing wife's attention is harder than surviving assassination attempts. Math tutoring becomes relationship therapy, and even grape juice stains can trigger international incidents when you're nobility. At Count Arden's party, proper etiquette demanded separating the children from the adults, because apparently even noble kids running around with desserts is considered unrefined. The children's gathering had its own social tensions, particularly when someone mentioned the crown prince Christian, immediately creating an uncomfortable atmosphere. Christian's absence was notable. He was supposedly, quote, feeling unwell, though Elissa cynically suspected he was faking illness to avoid the embarrassment of facing the Rubilin family after recent events. The other children clearly worshipped Christian, like a god, making them hostile toward the Rubilin party. Elissa, ever defiant, declared she didn't care what they thought. She enthusiastically dragged Richard to the dessert table, force-feeding him sweets despite his protests, quote, I don't like sweets, and interpreting his silence as agreement. However, her new heels were torturing her feet, leading to her to escape to a balcony for relief while maintaining her dignity. Quote, you can't ask a lady where she's going. The real drama unfolded when Elissa overheard vicious gossip about Richard. shadowy figures whispered cruel lies, that Richard's mother was a prostitute, that he was from the streets, a former mercenary who was strong but dumb, and calling him a petty noble and monster. The confrontation escalated when Rose Felice, Christian's fiancée and future stepmother to the male lead, appeared with her supporters, mockingly asking Elissa how it feels to be married to a monster. Elissa's response was magnificently defiant. "I love it. It's so much better than cheap gossiping." When Rose Felice took offense at being called cheap, Elissa delivered a masterclass in noble hierarchy. "She's still Rose Felice, and I'm Elissa Rubilin. Can't you see who should be respectful to whom right now?" Because apparently, even in medieval times, knowing your place in the social pecking order was crucial. Richard appeared at the perfect moment, calling the gossipers a bunch of vermin and protectively taking Elissa's hand to lead her away. He advised her to ignore the gossip, but Elissa had a different philosophy. Using the metaphor of water droplets eventually breaking through stone, she explained why she wouldn't stay silent. "I decided to be on your side, so I hate the idea of not doing anything even more. So you have to be on my side too. If anyone ever says anything bad about me, you need to blow them away with your wind." Richard was deeply moved by having someone truly on his side, someone willing to stand up for him despite being scared. His protective instincts extended to practical care. Noticing her painful heels, he knelt and offered her a piggyback ride, instructing her to wrap her arms around his neck so she wouldn't fall. After the party, peaceful spring days arrived. Elissa's quiet library plans were disrupted when she discovered Richard training with shirtless knights in the garden. Her flustered reaction, "Why are there so many shirtless men?" quickly turned practical as she rationalized they must be hot from exercise. When Richard caught her watching, she nervously claimed she found it cool and might want to learn. Richard immediately offered to teach her sword fighting, causing Elissa to hastily retreat before he could make it a serious offer. Richard's desire to impress Elissa, who had called knight training cool, led him to challenge Thompson, one of his knights, to a duel. Thompson, confused about why he'd been singled out, initially planned to go easy on his lord to avoid offending him. However, the reality proved humbling for both. Thompson discovered Richard was faster than expected, while Richard realized, "I can barely defend myself, let alone go easy on him." The duel ended with Thompson's rapier at Richard's throat and Richard's sword on the ground. Thompson, surprised by his own victory, offered a rematch, if this was just practice, but the scene revealed that despite his magical powers and noble status, Richard still had much to learn about conventional combat. This section shows the relationship between Richard and Elissa deepening into genuine partnership. Latest developments. Wife becomes fierce defender of husband's honor. Husband discovers piggyback rides are effective relationship building, and noble dueling proves that magical powers don't automatically translate to sword skills. Who knew? Richard's sword duel ended with brutal honesty. He admitted the outcome would be the same in a rematch. Meanwhile, Elissa pragmatically planned her post-divorce life, studying maps and identifying potential territories to purchase, because even in medieval times, real estate research was essential. The peaceful spring ended abruptly when Duke Rubilin received an imperial decree invoking the ancient Oath of Brothers. With Crown Prince Christian conveniently sick, Elissa correctly suspected he was faking. The emperor ordered Richard to fight in the Perrin Kingdom War on behalf of the Crown Prince. Elissa's distress was overwhelming. Despite knowing from the original story that Richard wouldn't die, she couldn't bear the thought of him suffering on the battlefield, sobbing that she didn't want Richard to go to war. Duke Rubilin, pressured by the war deployment, made a cruel demand. Richard and Elissa must start trying for a baby immediately to secure the bloodline. Richard's response was explosive. He refused outright and, when pressed about his duties as heir, declared he would give up his title entirely. This led to a dramatic confrontation where Richard essentially threatened to destroy House Rubelin himself rather than let others claim it. The patriarch, faced with his grandson's fierce determination and the reality that Richard meant more to the house's survival than his own authority, finally conceded to Richard's demands. Richard received only 1 month to prepare for deployment, unusually short, suggesting imperial urgency. He threw himself into intensive training in monster-infested forests, returning each evening exhausted and wounded. Elissa would inspect his injuries and apply ointment while scolding him for not taking better care of himself. Their relationship deepened through intimate conversations about love and first experiences. Richard, wise beyond his years despite his traumatic upbringing, advised Elissa about the importance of being with someone she truly loved. His difficult background, mother's early death, uncle's betrayal, father's abandonment, grandfather's threats, made Elissa's care precious to him. The touching revelation that Richard didn't even know his real birthday led to Elissa choosing a birthday for him and preparing a celebration, showing how she was creating the family warmth he'd never experienced. On their last night together, Elissa gave Richard a protective pendant with a red stone and made him promise never to remove it. Richard shared the location of a secret passage near their wardrobe for her emergency escape, promising to find her wherever she was. Despite promising to wake Elissa for their goodbye, Richard chose to leave while she slept, believing it would be easier for both of them. Elissa's discovery of his departure devastated her. She felt betrayed by the broken promise while simultaneously worrying about his safety. With Richard gone, Elissa's position in the household became precarious. Duke Rubilin treated her with less respect, and some maids even began stealing her accessories, assuming Richard would die and the house would fall. Elissa responded decisively, dismissing the thieves and asserting her authority as Lady of House Rubilin. Duke Rubilin eventually recognized Elissa's capabilities and hired Argyle as her assistant. Over 7 years, Elissa transformed from a young bride into a skilled territorial administrator. She established communication with Richard through letters and dried flowers, maintaining their connection across the years. When drought threatened food shortages, Elissa developed innovative solutions using the territory's high-quality ironstone resources. She organized production of farming tools and weapons for trade, negotiating food-based agreements with the southern district plagued by pirates. Her policies reduced unemployment while securing food supplies through strategic trade relationships. At the emperor's birthday banquet, Elissa encountered Christian, who had recovered remarkably quickly after Richard's departure. When rumors circulated that Christian had faked illness to avoid military service, Elissa's diplomatic responses inadvertently pressured him into proving his courage by joining the reinforcements. After 7 grueling years, the war finally ended, with Richard earning the legendary epithet Rubilin of the Storm. When imperial messengers arrived expecting him to attend victory celebrations, Richard surprised everyone. He simply wanted to go home to Elissa. His single-minded focus on returning to his wife after 7 years of separation demonstrated the depth of their bond. Meanwhile, Elissa prepared for his return while grappling with their childhood divorce agreement, which specified separation when she came of age. So guys, what do you think about this story? If you love this story to continue, please comment the name Seo Yuna. See you in the next one!